My name is Charlotte, and for as long as I can remember, I lived in the shadow of my older sister, Amelia. She was the golden child, the one who walked into a room and effortlessly captured everyone's attention. Whether it was her grades, her smile, or her charm, Amelia had it all. And me? I was just there. We grew up in a modest ranch-style house on the outskirts of Raleigh, North Carolina. Our father, Henry, was a hardworking truck driver, and Mom, Victoria, juggled shifts at a local diner. Money was always tight, yet somehow, Amelia always had what she needed: designer clothes, new school supplies, a room that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I, on the other hand, made do with hand-me-downs and silence. I still remember one cold December evening. Amelia was gushing about a science project she aced. Dad smiled proudly. Mom promised to buy her supplies for the next big assignment. I quietly mentioned getting an A on my math test. No one looked up. "That's nice, Charlotte," Mom muttered. That night, something shifted inside me. A quiet ache, a deep realization. I wasn't seen. Not really. And that was just the beginning. That holiday season was a painful reminder of my place in the family. The living room sparkled with lights and laughter, but every gift under the tree had one name: Amelia. She squealed with joy, hugging our parents after unwrapping a new tablet, designer boots, and even a ticket to a science camp in California. I opened mine quietly, a worn-out paperback and a bag of socks. "Thanks," I whispered, forcing a smile to hide the sting. I told myself not to care, but deep down, it hurt. It always did. The only person who ever made me feel seen was Aunt Grace. She brought thoughtful little gifts, a charm bracelet, a notebook with my initials. But after a heated argument with my parents about how they treated me, she stopped coming. I overheard my dad once, his voice cold. If Charlotte were more like Amelia, we wouldn't have this problem. He didn't know I was in the hallway. Aunt Grace saw me. We locked eyes. And then, she was gone. I stopped expecting anything after that. When Amelia graduated, she got a full ride to a private university, paid for by our parents. I graduated the next year with honors, and got a card with $20 and a pat on the back. A week later, I quietly moved out. 2 duffel bags, a spare room in a tiny apartment on the edge of Asheville. I worked 2 jobs, diner by day, bookstore by night. It was exhausting, but I was saving for college. Then the flu hit hard. I was shivering in bed under 3 blankets when Jenna, my best friend, found me. She took me to a sliding scale clinic. I left with medicine and an empty wallet. That night, I made the hardest call of my life. I called home. Calling home was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I hadn't really spoken to my mom in over a year. As the phone rang, my heart pounded. "Hello." Her voice was distant, cold. "Hi, Mom. It's me, Charlotte." A pause. "Oh, Charlotte, is everything okay?" I swallowed hard. I need a place to stay, just for a little while. Things haven't been easy." Another long silence. "Well, Amelia and her husband are staying in your old room. And she's pregnant. It's not a good time." My throat tightened. "I can sleep on the couch. It won't be long, I promise." Her voice turned sharp. "Charlotte, now's not a good time. Amelia's expecting. There's a lot going on here. Maybe later." Later, always later. And later never came. "Okay," I whispered, as the last bit of hope left me. She hung up. I sat in my freezing apartment, numb. My own family had turned me away. Again. Then, a light. My phone rang. Aunt Grace. "Charlotte, sweetheart," I heard. "Are you all right?" That one voice broke me. "I'm trying," I whispered. "Pack your things. You're coming here. You're not going through this alone. But I don't want to be a burden." "You're not. You never were." The next morning, I left everything cold behind and walked into warmth. Her cottage was small, but it felt like the safest place I'd known in years. Over quiet dinners and gentle laughter, I began to feel whole again. One morning, she asked me, "What do you really want, Charlotte?" I looked her in the eye. "I want to be a lawyer. I want to matter." She smiled. "Then get in. I'll help pay. But promise me, no quitting." Tears filled my eyes. "I promise." That day, everything shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I had purpose and someone who believed in me, and that changed everything. Aunt Grace's promise lit a fire in me. It was the first time in my life someone believed I could be more, not just survive, but succeed. I applied to every law program I could find, with decent rankings and realistic tuition. Late nights were spent hunched over my laptop, perfecting personal statements, editing resumes, and sending out applications with trembling fingers. Then it happened. An envelope arrived in the mail from Carolina State University, one of the best public law programs in the state. I opened it slowly, heart pounding. "Congratulations. You've been accepted into the fall cohort of our Juris Doctor program." I stared at the letter, hands shaking. "Aunt Grace," I yelled through the house. She rushed in, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I got in," I whispered, tears already brimming. She didn't say anything at first. She just pulled me into the tightest hug. I never doubted it. College life was a whirlwind. The pressure was immense. Case studies, legal theory, memorizing Latin phrases that made no sense until they suddenly did. But for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I was exactly where I belonged. Aunt Grace's support made everything possible. But it also came with a quiet pressure, not from her words, but from her belief in me. I couldn't let her down. I studied harder than I ever had. I pulled all-nighters in the library, survived mock trials, and even made the dean's list my first semester. Still, the imposter syndrome crept in, especially when classmates casually mentioned their parents were lawyers or judges. And I remembered how my mother didn't even want me on her couch. But then I'd come home to Aunt Grace, sitting at the kitchen table with a warm plate of food and a proud smile. "Tell me what you learned today," she'd say. And I'd talk for hours. It grounded me, reminded me why I was doing this. In my second year, I landed a coveted internship at a respected law firm downtown. On my first day, I walked into the building in a secondhand blazer and shoes slightly too tight, but my chin was up. I had earned this. My supervisor, Mr. Coleman, was a tough, no-nonsense attorney who rarely smiled. At first, I thought he regretted choosing me, but little by little, I proved myself. In research, in clarity of thought, in grit. One evening, he saw me still working at my desk long after everyone had left. "You always stay this late?" he asked, surprised. "Only when it matters," I said, eyes still glued to my notes. He grunted, then pulled up a chair. "Show me what you've got." We stayed late reviewing the case, and by the end of it, he looked at me and said, "Not bad, Charlotte. You've got something sharp in you." It was the first time a professional saw in me what Aunt Grace already knew. I was capable, and that belief, it changed everything. Graduation day arrived like a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. I stood in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd for one face, and there she was, Aunt Grace, front row, clapping louder than anyone. When my name was called and I crossed that stage, I locked eyes with her. She was crying. So was I. "You did it, sweetheart," she whispered, hugging me tight outside the auditorium. "You turned your whole life around." I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight with emotion. But I knew she was right. Armed with my law degree, I began the grueling process of applying to jobs. The market was tough, competitive, full of talented people with connections and shiny resumes. But I had grit. I had nights full of unpaid internships and days buried in legal texts. I sent out application after application, went to nerve-wracking interviews, and waited. One afternoon, I got the call. "Hi, this is Jared from Mason & Associates. We'd like to offer you the junior associate position. Mr. Coleman spoke highly of you." I nearly dropped the phone. I'd be honored. Thank you. It was a new beginning. The first time I felt like I truly had a future. I threw myself into the work, long hours, demanding cases, intense deadlines, and I loved it. It was exhausting, but exhilarating. I was building something of my own. For the first time, my life wasn't shaped by anyone else's shadow. Around this time, Aunt Grace's health began to decline. She never made a fuss, but I noticed the signs: slower steps, more naps, doctor's appointments that she brushed off with a smile. Then, one day at work, I got the call. Hospital, emergency. I left everything and rushed there. She looked so small in the hospital bed, but her eyes, still sharp, still warm, locked onto mine. "I'm here, Aunt Grace. I'm right here," I whispered, holding her hand. She squeezed back faintly. "You did good, kid," she murmured. "I'm proud of you, and I left you something." "Aunt Grace, don't." "The house, Charlotte. It's yours. Always was meant to be." That night, she passed away. Grief came like waves, but within it was something else. Purpose. I moved into the little cottage that had once been my sanctuary. I poured my heart into it. New paint, fresh flowers, a little reading nook by the window. I turned it into a home that radiated love, just like Aunt Grace had. And just when I thought the past was behind me, they came knocking. My parents, Amelia, her husband, her kids. At first, it seemed like a courtesy visit, but soon, Amelia started eyeing the rooms like she was house hunting. Her husband dropped hints. My mom said it plainly. "Charlotte, don't you think it's time you gave the house to Amelia? She has kids. You're just you." It was the ultimate test, and I had a choice. Be the quiet girl again, or stand my ground. I looked at my mother like she was a stranger. "Give the house to Amelia," I repeated, stunned. "Because she has kids? Because I'm just me?" Mom blinked, confused by my tone. "We're family, Charlotte. Family sacrifices." I laughed, not from humor, but disbelief. Where was family when I was sick and couldn't afford a doctor? When I asked to come home and you told me the couch was too crowded? Nobody answered. Amelia stepped forward, her voice sugary sweet, but laced with entitlement. "Charlotte, we're not trying to take anything from you, but let's be honest, you don't need all this space. It's just logical." Her husband added with a smirk, "Come on, it's not like you earned this place." That was it. I straightened my back, my voice steady. "Actually, I did. Aunt Grace left this house to me, in her will. And I've earned everything I've built here, with sleepless nights, hard work, and no help from any of you." Amelia's eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish. I'm setting boundaries." They didn't expect me to fight back, not the quiet girl, the one who used to disappear into the background. But I wasn't her anymore. "I need you all to leave," I said, calm but firm. Mom's voice cracked. "Charlotte, please, think about the children." I did, and I'm not raising someone else's. They left that evening, resentful, muttering, but gone. I changed the locks the next morning. For a few months, things were peaceful. I poured myself into work and created a rhythm. Then one night, I came home and couldn't get in. The lock was different. Panicked, I knocked hard. The door opened, and there stood Amelia, arms crossed like she owned the place. Her kids were sprawled across the living room floor. Boxes lined the hallway. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. "We moved in," she replied, unfazed. "You weren't using it properly." I felt my pulse race. "You changed the locks and broke in. That's illegal." She shrugged. "Go ahead, call the cops. Let's see who they believe." And I did. By the time the police arrived, our parents had shown up too, siding with Amelia, of course. Her husband even got in my face, threatening me. So I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You want to threaten me? Say it again." That shut him up fast. The officers were clear. They had no right to be there. Forced entry, changing locks. It didn't matter if they were family. They had to leave. As they packed up, Amelia shot me a look like I'd destroyed her life. But I didn't flinch. Because for the first time, I wasn't just protecting a house. I was protecting me, my space, my peace, and the future Aunt Grace believed in. After that day, the silence in my home wasn't painful anymore. It was peaceful. Sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset, I realized the storm had passed. Not just the battle for my house, but for my place in the world. I had finally said enough and meant it. I stopped shrinking myself for people who only loved me when it was convenient. I stopped chasing validation from those who made me feel invisible. I chose me, unapologetically. A few weeks later, I met Michael at a friend's dinner party. He wasn't flashy, just kind, real, and steady. We talked for hours. When I told him I didn't talk to most of my family, he simply said, "That's their loss." And I believed him. He showed up to help fix the sink, to cook on rainy nights, to walk beside me on Sundays. With him, I wasn't broken or overlooked. I was Charlotte, whole, and finally enough. One night, wrapped in a blanket, he paused our movie and asked softly, "Would you let me share this space with you?" I looked at him, heart calm. I'd like that. Life still had its bumps. Amelia stirred trouble. Mom called to guilt trip me, but I no longer bent. I no longer tried to fix what wasn't mine to fix. I focused on building a life that felt like me. I passed the bar, won my first case, and began mentoring young women who, like me, once felt small. And I reminded them, and myself, you are not what they called you. You are who you choose to become. Healing doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just a woman in her own home, finally free. The story of Charlotte teaches us that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, support, and love. For years, she lived in the shadow of others, quietly enduring rejection and being made to feel less than. But when she found the courage to stand up for herself, everything changed. She didn't just claim ownership of a house, she claimed ownership of her identity. She stopped waiting for permission to matter. It reminds us that the love we fight for, the life we build, and the boundaries we set, those are the things that define us. Sometimes, healing starts not with forgiveness, but with boundaries and self-respect. And it's okay to walk away from people who only show up when they need something. Because in the end, your peace is priceless, and protecting it is not selfish. It's survival. If you've ever felt invisible or undervalued in your family, your job, or your relationships, let this story be your reminder. You are not required to shrink to be loved. It's okay to walk away from toxic environments, even if they come wrapped in the word family. Take small steps today to reclaim your power, set boundaries, say no when it matters. Speak up for your needs, even if your voice shakes. Surround yourself with people who pour into you, not just take. And most importantly, don't be afraid to fight for your own version of home, whether that's a physical space, a career, or a life where you are finally seen. If you enjoy deep, emotional, and meaningful stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new update. Your support is the motivation that drives us to keep bringing you powerful stories. Once again, thank you for being here, and see you in the next story.